Okay, hello everybody, how are you? Welcome to the Open Hour. For those who don't know, I'm Cassandra Ferris. I am the community manager here at SaltStack. A lot of my job is aimed at helping basically our contributor community and our core team collaborate together more effectively, make Salt better, listen to some of your questions, concerns, that sort of stuff, and just help us all work better together. To that extent, as always, we're going to start with some news and updates. There are several of them this week. One quick one is that I know that there are a lot of questions about the triage process. We have recently added a triage stream to our Twitch schedule. We do that every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. UTC. So feel free to pop in there, pop onto the Twitch, and find out more about how we triage things. Kind of a unique thing I want to start doing is highlighting some of the general open source software development community events that are out there, and there happen to be several happening either right now or coming up. Currently is the CodePalooza conference. It's a conference based out of Louisville, Kentucky. Covers a broad array of technical, security, DevOps, and human skills topics. And that's happening today and tomorrow online. I am giving a talk tomorrow morning on how business and technical teams can communicate more effectively. Another conference going on tomorrow and Friday is the Diana Initiative, which is focused at women in InfoSec. And then upcoming in September is Get With It, which is another women in tech conference based out of Ohio. These events are not limited, obviously, just to women. Anybody is welcome to join, but it might be something you want to check out. And then somebody told me that CDCon, which is a Linux Foundation conference, is happening in October. If anybody wants more information about any of those events, let me know. I like the idea of kind of having the SALT community and the greater technology community getting on each other's radars a little bit more. As far as what the focus has been this week, releases, SEPs, and updates for the core team, our dev team has basically just been focusing on some planned technical debt issues, nothing major there. And then from a community standpoint, we're working on the new contributor greeting and orientation process. And before I get to my final update, does anybody else have any updates or news that they would like to share? All right, in that case, the other big piece of news is that in the coming weeks, we're going to be switching to PyTest as the only test runner. A blog post went live on the community site earlier this week. Pedro had written that post up, and we'll be making that change in the coming weeks, but check out the blog post if you'd like more information. And then that is actually the first topic that we have for today is the switch to PyTest, kind of what it entails and why we made that switch. So let Pedro take it away.
Hello, I'm Pedro. I'm one of the core team engineers. And as the blog post title says, this is a journey of 3 years. If we want to be accurate, it's almost 4, but the first commit was only pushed to the Salt repo 3 years ago. So that's why it says 3 and not 4. Now, the reason, if you guys know PyTest, you probably know why we are trying to switch to PyTest. It's testing framework which focuses on code reusability through fixtures, and that's really powerful. It's also really good at giving insight when tests fail. You even have options to show global variables, so it's way more powerful than our own custom test runner, which we had to continuously keep maintaining and updating every time we had a new test type or added a new directory to the test suite. And not at all times we happened to update our test runner, and so some tests were added, but they would not run on the CI pipeline. So this was a massive undertaking, and most of the test suite is still written using unit test 2, although PyTest can run those tests perfectly fine. But a lot had to change for us to be able to run those tests under PyTest. And that's why all of this time was taken. And of course, it was not taking 3 years every day. There were some days, some time slots addressed to that, and in overall, it did took the 3 years, but it is a good place to be right now because we are getting a way more powerful testing framework. Um, we are migrating some of the slow tests as time goes by to PyTest. We already have community members contributing PyTest tests. And if you start taking a look at those tests, you will see that they are way simpler than the unit test ones are. And we are still making changes to make it easy and facilitate that whole process of writing tests for SALT. So more or less, that's why we are switching. We want to not be the ones maintaining the test runner. We want that maintained by a big community, as PyTest is. We want it. We want to be able to have better ways to selecting tests when we are running them locally. We want to know what was the issue when tests fail. And sometimes our test suite, the custom test runner just says true is not false, and that's not helpful. And PyTest actually adds a few more bits of information which can get you to the root cause of why that failed. If you have any doubts on how to write tests for PyTest or anything else related to our switch, we have a few examples on the blog post of what switches for someone contributing to SALT, which is mostly the way you run the test suite. Those examples should get you going, but if not, feel free to ping me or any one of the core dev teams, of core dev members. We will be glad to answer your questions and make you get past any blocking issue that you have. We are trying to make this transition smooth. We have been running the test suite under both test runners to see if they both behave the same, and they have been. And so there are some internal procedures that we will have to take care of before we actually migrate, but we're getting close and it's going to happen soon. And I hope that everyone is as excited as we are about it. If not, talk to us and I'm sure we can get you excited about it also. That's it. Any questions?
I see feedback that says, yay, PyTest, and I saw some positive feedback on the switch to PyTest in Slack as well, so glad to hear that people are receiving that well.
Yeah, we're excited about that. You may not be able to tell from this call exactly, but definitely on the SaltStack side of things, we are super excited.
Yeah, I've been using PyTest during the test clinic, and it's very much nicer.
Yeah, I know that I think the cloud working group has also kind of been using some of that framework too, and I at least I know Ahmad has, or Tyler, and he's very excited as well. I don't think he's on this call today, but I know that he is super excited about that. So we've definitely got lots of people that are thrilled to be using it, and we're trying to get the word out there that we will be switching. So trying to give it more communication and get people as excited about it as we are. So it's going to be really, really awesome, and I just can't wait. Thank you, Pedro.
Yeah, and if anyone sees or hears about a member that didn't get the message, let us know where they are usually where they usually are, so that we can get that communication to those places as well. We want to make contributors aware that we are making this switch ahead of time, if possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this first blog post has gone out to quite a few channels, so definitely giving it props here too, so that we're hopefully communicating in lots of ways so people will get it.
Yeah, we have it posted on the community site, and then that was shared via, as usual, Slack, IRC, and the SALT Announce Google mailing list. I basically moved all of the announcements to SALT Announce, and I don't put, only really major things go into SALT users. I don't want to clutter up the users channel with news and updates.
Oh, good call.
All right, well, you said something about the working group, Sage, so that's an excellent transition point. We wanted to talk a little bit about the working groups as kind of the SALT project evolves and changes, so do some of the working groups. To start, for those who aren't familiar with the working groups, basically they're small groups of people who get together with a common goal and work toward that goal within a predetermined amount of time. Some of these groups seem to be ongoing for months or maybe even years. Some seem to last for a short time to solve a specific problem. But basically, these are a good way for anybody in the SALT community to get together, to lead projects, to participate in projects, and to cater to your specific area of interest. So if you're interested in testing or Windows or Mac or documentation, those are all areas where you can join a work group, and then by joining the work group, find ways to practically contribute in a hands-on way and in kind of a more structured focus. Anybody's eligible to be a part of a working group, basically. You just have to exhibit an interest in working on the SALT project. The working group meetings are all posted on the community calendar. Most of them meet once a month. Formulas and documentation meet every other week. Working groups are basically led by a captain. The captain a lot of times actually steps up and volunteers and says, hey, I'd like to start and or lead this working group. So it's not a very formal process right now to get those up and coming. And other than that, I think that's basically about it for the working group. So they meet, and then between meetings, they'll have different things to work on. Each working group kind of has its own way to manage documentation, the project timeline, and everything else. So we leave that up to the group to figure out what works best for them. So all of that being said, we've had one change to at least one of our working groups. Shane has stepped away from leading the working group, and Marcus Kramer, one of our community contributors, has stepped up to lead that group. So thank you for that. Basically, just wanted to talk about additional work groups that we may want to see and how to handle work groups that aren't as active. So for instance, it's been suggested that we have a Kubernetes work group, maybe a temporary thing, maybe not. And then we've talked about how the SSH and security work groups haven't been, or the SSH and networking work groups haven't been terribly active lately. And so try to decide whether we should disband them or keep them going or what to do there. So let's start with talking about, does anybody else want to pipe in with anything about working groups? I'm going to give you all a link to the working group info too.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a myriad of topics that go on there. Like the cloud working group has kind of a focus and has a lot of work with stuff that's been going on with ITEM and POP and Tiamat and all of those projects. And so they have a lot of things there, and that's really exciting. And then I think while Heist was going on and before that was really implemented, SSH had quite a bit, but then they've sort of lulled. But I think that they need a focus. And so as we looked at that Kubernetes group, they actually would have a focus. And so one of the reasons to have it be short-term is that they would have a short-term goal. And so they would have an end in sight and not just sort of just Kubernetes in general. And Gareth can probably talk to that a little bit more. And then maybe looking to some of the groups where we have a lot of activity, that if they need more focus, that we could help drive that too, that we could find some things that gave them some goals to work on, or they could just state their own so that then we can draw on that for other working groups as well. Gareth, do you want to say more about Kubernetes?
Yes, but probably not appropriate for this venue.
Gotcha, no worries. Yeah, I was thinking high level.
No, I think, yeah, no, Kubernetes is one of those things where like it's gaining a lot of traction, or has gained a lot of traction, just in the broader tech community. And a lot of people are looking for ways to simplify their automation behind it. And we have some really good, a really good implementation within Salt to work with it. It just, in a lot of areas, it hasn't really like caught up with or maintained the same pace that Kubernetes development has. So there's a lot of areas where like things work, but not as well as they should. We don't support a lot of the newer features. So having a working group that kind of focuses on that area of Salt would be really beneficial to both the project and users as a whole.
Yeah, and one that we've tossed around, I don't know if a working group is quite the right setting for this, but we've sort of tossed it around as a working group that's focused on our triage process and help around that. That is not the most glamorous thing to be doing, but it could be a short-term thing, or it could be even a long-term, in that you could join the group to learn about how we triage, and then getting started with Salt. Because some of the reason that I think that some of our core team is so well versed in Salt at all is because they've spent just years triaging issues. And it's a really good way to learn, to see what other people are doing and how they're using it, certain aspects or certain modules. And so it could be long-term, it could be short-term. I'm not entirely sure around that. We haven't had a lot of interest from the community in that. It's more us driving that. So it may just be an internal working group, and therefore doesn't seem as appropriate to expose that, or if people aren't interested. But we would be interested in getting help from the community, because we definitely see that you guys have lots of better ideas than what our small groups can bring. And so we actually love to open it up and find out where you guys have experience, and try to implement some other things.
I would add to that too. I think I would encourage people to, just as like we do these community hours, join the weekly triage hour that we've started doing. If for no other reason, like when we triage issues, we can tell usually, like from a Salt perspective, if something is a bug, but not always like the underlying system, like with Salt interacting with it, because just the breadth and scope of what Salt can do, like we cannot be experts in every single subsystem that Salt works with. And so if someone out there like has some expertise in a particular subsystem, that might point out like where what we may not realize is a bug in Salt, because of the way it's interacting with that subsystem, would be hugely helpful.
Right, or even a really helpful feature that we just haven't thought of, that the community on the whole has a really large thought that we should really try to implement, because it would be widely used and it could be maintained and by the community as well, because that's always exciting for us. And there's just, as anybody may know, we have just a very large backlog, and I've been combing through it, and it gets hard to see the forest through the trees at times. And so it's good to have help. It's good to have people that are telling us where they're diving in and where their expertise lies, just like Gareth was saying. So, and we actually haven't had that up on Twitch just yet. That is my fault. I don't know how to do that, but it is on Zoom, and I think that the Zoom link is also in that community calendar event. And next week I'll get Cassandra's help to get that on Twitch, so that we also have both of those going. A great way to just see what our thought process and how we go through that triage process. And also, it would be great that if you're submitting an issue and you just want to talk about that one, wanted to get some feedback or how it might be received, or you know, explain a little more, love to have you.
And also from like with the docs working group, we have that today, actually, I think right after this session. And if there are things in docs that you've wanted to contribute to or even point out as issues that should also be documented in order to be have people take a look at them, or hear about how we're planning on a future kind of like docs jam and docs clinic that kind of walks through how people can contribute to the docs, and in October how we kind of want to see about currently getting a docs jam in, and maybe that could coincide with something like Hacktoberfest. Don't really know, but if you're interested in taking a look at that working group, I believe that follows right after here. I could probably post in the chat the information too.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, I think that Imran actually came to us with the formulas work group and wanted to implement that, and that's been a really self-sustaining working group, and they have lots of drive and love it, and other people have other ideas for other groups. We'd like to hear from you. I think that that would be a great way to get some of those started. Pedro, you're on. I know the test and release working group they had some drive and definitely had some goals, but I think it was just full of people who were too busy to actually move on some of the goals with that group. But I really liked the idea of that one. Is that one sort of slightly inactive? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, check on that one. What else about working groups, Cassandra?
So, sorry, I got another message. So we've talked about potential working groups that we may want to form, or do we want to talk about the Kubernetes group or put that on hold for now? I know it's early discussion.
Yeah, I think everything Gareth gave is probably pretty good for now. Love to see if we have some interest from the community to reach out to us about it.
Okay. Do we have any sort of, or should there be a formal process for disbanding or deactivating a working group?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that if we put together something like the Kubernetes working group that we're thinking of, and we had a really specific goal and time frame, that it would be formal in that way. The others, I think that they're mostly pausing, and but if not, then I think that it probably is a good idea to have a more formal process that doesn't need to be complicated, but definitely to have something in place, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, nothing about, like, forming working groups is not a complicated process at all. It's basically somebody says, hey, I want to form a working group about this thing. They contact me, I help with logistics. We set up a page and we start meeting. I don't think that, you know, deactivating or pausing them needs to be any more complicated than somebody just letting me know.
Yeah, and probably putting something into the community repo stating that, and maybe the final decision on how we got to that. And that could be no more than sort of an MD file that just outlines that and the date. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe that's the next step then, is to put something in the repo about the working groups that haven't been as active.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to do some sort of either a project board or issues, or so then you have issue list, or even just MD files for meeting notes. I think all of those are sort of being used in various ways, and I think those are great. But to have something in the repo for each working group so we can kind of see where they are and what they're doing, and then that will also alert us to sort of this, for lack of a better word, sort of the staleness of what's going on in the group. If there's not any activity in that repo or in that subdirectory of that repo, then we'll know that they probably need us to step in and just sort of formally close it down with like, looks like this group's not meeting, and if it wants to take it up later, we can, and then go on a sort of pause or hiatus and then formally close it if there's no activity. Super simple. Yeah, other like Nick and Imran, do you guys use a project board or issues or anything? And not that it has to be in that repo, or what are you guys using for your work groups? I know that Docs has another repo. Go ahead.
So for cloud, with everything sort of focusing on item, we're using a board that's in the GitLab item cloud repo.
Awesome.
To sort of track like different providers and their status. So that's kind of where we are right now with that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us, it's we're using Tiger, which is a Scrum system. We're not using it with all the features, but we're kind of breaking down the blocks and using some rough values to help see the sizes of the tasks involved, and then breaking those down further into user stories and stuff. So we're trying to adopt that, because what we've seen with formulas over the years is that it's actually much wider than it seems on the surface. There's lots of things we get involved with, and these are long, there are ideas which last for maybe 6 months, maybe even 12 months to implement. So it's just keeping track of that using that board, and we just shift the tasks that haven't been done for a current sprint between 2 meetings. We shift that to the next meeting on. And so it kind of keeps a history for us as well, what we did. And we've also got the current view for the current meeting sprint. And that's how we've been operating.
Yeah, that sounds great.
With the documentation, with the docs working group too, we've actually thought and talked about whether we would adopt something similar to that as an idea, just because docs, for example, are not just in either the Salt main repo or in like how Item Cloud, for example, is where a lot of the cloud stuff's going on, is in a single repo. Docs is kind of all over pretty much anything that's been open sourced by Salt. And so by Salt Stack. So it's kind of, we've been also trying to figure out, okay, are we going to be doing automation to work with issues in our own repo, or are we going to work to maybe collaborate in it with a different third-party tool, like maybe, I don't know, Tygo or Trello or something else? And so, yeah, it's a work in progress too for us organizing ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think similarly with formulas, it gets so broad that sometimes it can be difficult to capture. But yeah, I think that we're on a good track on all of this. So thanks for sharing, guys.
So while we're talking about formal processes regarding the working groups, when these were first stood up, I wasn't the initial captain of the cloud working group, but I seem to recall that it was sort of intended that the captains be kind of a temporary position. Is there any like formal process for like, okay, now's the end of your time, go ahead and see if you can find a successor? Or is it just like, hey, I'm going to keep doing this until somebody comes along and says they want to do it instead of me?
Yeah, so I think the original intent was for the group itself, and thus the captain was sort of on a release cycle. And at that time, we were still new to sort of the 4-month period of time for a release cycle. so that was a little bit of a like, well, let's see what happens. And then we have, most of them didn't really get started in that 4-month period, or they had just gotten started, and some had finished up. And so we kind of left that a little bit open. I think that we could be more formal in that, and give that release timeline, you know, a bit more focus to say, okay, so, you know, we don't want to necessarily disband this group. We think that we're going to keep going, but that would be a good point to assess and say, so, you know, here's the captain, here's the work group. What more work do we have to do? Let's keep going, or is it time to restructure? And that's kind of the process that I think that we should go with now. And since we are just on the heels of starting a new release cycle, we probably should put that more formally in place, and come together and say, maybe in the open hour, hey, so we just had a release, you know, and so now's kind of the time to take a look at your working groups and make sure that everything's kind of going as well as it should be. Is it time to refocus? Is it time to take a pause? Is it time to reset a captain? You know, some of those real basic things of the working groups, and just give them that format of that time frame. Does that sound okay to you, Nick?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not trying to like step out from underneath of it or anything. I was mostly asking from a perspective of, you know, I would love to find a way to drive more involvement in the cloud working group, and I'm not really sure the best way to do that. You know, and I'm going to show up regardless whether I'm captain or not. You know, if I gave it over to somebody else, at least that's one other person showing up for the meetings.
Totally. And I think that maybe that is what we need to start doing, is talking about it here in the open hour at the release time frame. So as we start getting close to a release, or on the heels of a release afterward, so that we could say, okay, so now we've done everything with the release, we're going to do, you know, a community retrospective on that too, and then have that a formal, like in the open hour, now let's talk about the working groups and what they're working on, and where that goes, because I think that could also drum up some more activity. And then of course, I'm open to other ideas. I know that Mo has had some ideas on involvement as well, and I'm interested to pick his brain a little bit about that, because I do think that we have a lot of work that we could give working groups, or goals, or you know, initiatives, and finding people to drive those within that group is where we may be struggling in some of them. And so I'm interested to dig in there as well, and see if we can make things happen.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I guess the only other thing that I'm curious about as a sidebar is, it sounded like we don't want to get into too much detail on Kubernetes, but is that sort of driving more into how that might fit inside of an item project in order to move with the pace of Kubernetes, or are we talking about expanding and refining the functionality that's currently in Salt?
I think we were actually talking more about what was in Salt today, but Gareth, you want to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I would say both, honestly. I think we want to make sure that what's in Salt currently is up to date, and like aligns with what Kubernetes, the capabilities of it today. But I think probably going the item route is probably the best, probably like a better option, the best course of action, just for maintainability going forward.
Yeah, I'm mostly worried about like the cadence, right? You know, like I've had PRs sitting in Salt for a while. You know, if we do something similar with things coming through the Kubernetes working group in Salt, then, you know, it's going to be out of date by the time it's merged. But, you know, maybe keeping it inside of a smaller project that's able to be a little bit more agile would be a better fit, right? Because, you know, we could be coding against 118 and then 119 just dropped, right, for Kubernetes. So it's
a good point.
It's tough to keep up with that pace.
It is. That's a good point. I think each one we would probably need to look at pretty carefully, and that's we see a lot of things happening with some of the modules that are there, and if it doesn't seem as appropriate to do it that way and to break it off, sure. I think that we're open to that idea because I think that we've seen a lot of momentum, like with the item project and with cloud and everything going, that we'd love to mimic that and be more agile, and that'd be really great. So maybe we need to consider that. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main kind of takeaway here is that we want to make sure that that portion of the code is given some attention, because it's one of those things where it's just lack of resources, and as you said, Nick, like PR is just kind of getting stale in the backlog. It's one of those things that just hasn't gotten the attention that it should have, given its prominence in the industry.
Which reminds me, I will go look at your tickets, Nick. Go look at your PRs.
I'm just gonna join every open hour and mention that.
That's fine.
That's one way to get it. Squeaky wheels, grease, that whole thing. That kind
That's
of applies.
It's to your credit, it has gone down, and I've been pleased with that. Yeah, it's
Okay.
tough, right? Like trying to track all the PRs that I open up, and then like, oh, new test was
Sure.
added. Got to go update it again. Darn.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. And I think that we do kind of have a slow process there. And I think that we could, with a lot of people's input and help, also improve that too. We're looking to improve that on our own, and definitely have initiatives where we're doing that. A lot of that is what we consider some tech debt and automation, just, that CI/CD, that we're just looking to make things better. But of course, we'd love to hear from you guys about other things that we could do to make it better. One of the things that we're working on this week that is sort of in its initial stages, and we've talked about it before, is just a greeting bot to say to somebody with their first ticket and their first PR, hey, thank you, and here's some other resources if you haven't seen these. And it's small things like that that I think that we need to put in place, as well as look at big picture, how we could be faster, better, more automated, and push some of these through. So definitely open to ideas of what people have there. Like if we take a look at the triage process and making that faster, I made one change and it seemed faster in the beginning, and now it seems like we're dragging. And so it's like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, Sage. Maybe we should have done something else. And, so it's an iterative process, right? Learn as we go.
Okay, it sounds like the work group discussions kind of come to a lull, so we still have about 15 minutes left. What's on everybody's mind?
So are we disbanding those working groups? Is that official?
I don't think it's official. I think the next step is going to be to post something and make it more broadly available that we're considering disbanding those working groups. So I like the suggestion of just putting up an MD file or something, or I don't know if we submit it as an issue. I'm not sure what, but we need to put something out there, I think, to the greater community that we're considering disbanding the groups, and give it maybe a week or so and then make the decision. And disbanding them isn't permanent either. That's one nice thing.
Yeah, I think, Megan, for the SSH group, we could probably look at that one. I think you guys have done a lot of notes and stuff to show the work that's been done and then how it's probably dropped off. And so that one would be a lot simpler to just say, yep, no longer have any goals for this. We'll just go ahead and put it on a permanent pause for right now. And then we could formally disband it in whatever time frame at the release cycle. Seems like a good time frame to go with.
I don't know if we want to put this on the docs working group or the SSH working group, but we had somebody asking about Heist in the pop channel today, and I started looking at it, and Heist is severely underdocumented. I think that it could probably use some better docs just around like use cases and things like that. And I don't know if we're running into like a broad bug, but I was able to replicate what the guy was seeing as far as errors in Heist. So I guess my next question is going to be like, where does a working group start and like community involvement, pick up, is the working group really responsible for all the things concerning that thing? Or like, you know, I don't know, like Heist is going to have things going on in
Sure.
perpetuity as long as it stays around, right? Like, is there a need for a governing, guiding body that you can sort of bring these types of things to?
Yeah.
Or is it like, just like, okay, well, file an issue, go ahead and fix it,
Right. And I think we're looking towards, we use this word sort of informally, but I think we actually mean it very formally, and that's to have a forum and to have an architectural board that's exposed to the community and community driven. So yes, having a governing body for that, and we haven't put that in place just yet. Heist, I think, does have some pretty good documentation, but it is in the read the docs. I just posted it in the chat, Nick. And
yeah, that's what I was looking at actually.
Okay.
And I think it's just a matter of like the overall, like, here's how you do this thing is kind of documented, but some of the more minutia of it isn't necessarily. And that's kind of the case with everything that came out around the same time, right? Like Item has some pretty good docs because, Tom's been hitting it pretty hard along with the pop book and pop docs and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But, other projects are, popping out fast, to use a pun. And so sometimes they don't get documented as well necessarily.
Yeah, so
Like,
that specifically, I think, is a really good example of how, like, I think formulas would be this way as well as docs being this way because they're so broad, and it's getting those groups together and maybe even having them collaborate together of like, how did we get started with this? We're also looking at with Derek, maybe you can talk about this just a little bit, of making a process so that documenting new projects and new features has a really set way and a really repeatable way and has some automation set in with it so that we can get docs up and running for new projects really quickly. And that's something that we've been working on sort of in the background for a little while and would really like to see, because I think that's a problem that we see across the board and sort of any software, that we want to see documentation get up quickly and then we want to see it maintained, and we all sort of struggle with that. And yet it's a really important piece, and I think it would be that way with formulas too, where it touches all these different things, and so that does need that governing body. So we probably need to look at that more closely, Nick, and start getting that in place quicker.
I would add that Heist was kind of unofficially worked on in the Salt SSH group at the beginning. But the focus has shifted to Salt SSH. So, and that is personally my focus for the magnesium release. So if we want to create a Heist working group, I'm more than willing to help out there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from that docs perspective, you're absolutely right, Nick, with a lot of those projects in that like pop sub org and GitLab, because I mean, for example, Umbra was another project that came out a while back around that same time, right, with Pop, Item, Heist, Umbra, and now that there's all these kind of offshoots, especially with the purpose of Pop being that plugin oriented, and there really is a necessity to kind of have like a baseline. And one of the side projects I'm working on is wanting to kind of have either built into Pop Seed or provided by some other fashion, like a templatized baseline of what we would consider something like minimal viable docs. As in, here's some examples of it used and how it works. Proper change versioning to kind of know, or like a release log to kind of know what's been introduced or fixed in a new release, and is it properly working with like read the docs, auto publishing the latest latest stuff, and one of the things I've been working on too is to just kind of get a unified Sphinx theme that's kind of using something that's using the base theme that we've introduced in enterprise.saltstack.com, so that our docs can follow a similar thing, can create PDFs for downloads if people that care about PDFs, but also so that it answers a lot of those basic questions for people to get a good understanding of how to get up and running with it, in addition to kind of the concepts of why it was created and the purpose of it. Yeah, because it is hard to scale documentarians, unless like maybe the engineers have nice templates that are just, hey, fill out these things before as a part of an MVP. This would be the minimal viable doc set. So getting input from people on what they would consider having a good baseline for new projects like that, I'd consider really valuable, and I could get into play somewhere.
Yeah, something like that would be awesome. You can take a look at what we did with item Azure RM. I'm trying to get the docs to a spot where they're nice and complete and informative and have quick starts and module references and all that good stuff. But we sort of had to build that from the ground up. And, if there's like a nice template that we could put forward, that would be spectacular. And, anything that you're working on regarding that stuff, I definitely want to integrate into Azure RM, just so that we can have uniformity, if in any theming or any of the other stuff that you're doing. I'd definitely be on board with that.
Cool. I'll keep you updated, and I'll also keep like the documentation and other channels aware in the Slack community when able, depending on how long it takes or when certain early versions of little templates are kind of available to be tweaked or used.
Yeah, very cool. I think that a lot of the work that's getting done in the docs working group is something that we probably need to be writing some blog posts on and start communicating about, and we will when we get a few minutes. They've been inundated with a lot of work, but we're excited about some of the stuff that's coming out, so that'll be great. And an intersection that is coming up between several internal groups, and then also with a ticket that you put out there, Nick, that describes a really interesting problem, and we're seeing it as well. And we have somebody else who's seen it with a customer that works on the sales side as a sales engineer, and we're just interested to get you guys all together and write some documentation on that to get that better documented and fixed. And it's cool to see those things come together. And so I think that we're really seeing the initial fruits of working groups, but we're still learning. And so we're still kind of like, oh, we didn't do that right, let's start again, so we're figuring it out too. Yeah, and something I thought about, but I haven't actually said out loud, that I'll say here, is to do a code jam within some of the working groups. So if they have a focus, or if they have some goals and they can't find time, like I think the test and release working group is a good example. They had some really interesting things they wanted to do, but they could never find the time. So if we set aside a time for them and time box it and get that done like a code jam, I think that we could make some really interesting progress there. And we're doing that with docs, and we've done that with test clinics. And so we've seen good success with that model. So I think we're going to start to go in that direction. And I'd love to see more of it. Maybe that's what we did with SSH or Heist, or both, to give a focus and give a succinct time frame to say, hey, let's code jam on this.
I think it's helpful too to have that like dedicated time set aside, especially if it's just one day, for these 2, 4, 8 hours. This is what we're focusing on, and where documentation working group, like we said, is next, and that's what we're talking about, is planning this documentation jam.
Yep. Yeah, and that one's going to be really interesting, because we have a really great I guess I'll call it a theme, where we want to start taking modules and getting the modules really well documented with examples. So we're looking for like SMEs within those modules to say, tell us how you use this. And so it has a really good focus, and it's got a really interesting focus. Like I'm just super interested to see what comes out of that, because we have, so I actually pulled it. There's like 526 modules within SALT. It's kind of like a really gigantic number for how many modules there are. I actually thought it would be more, but 500 range is a pretty good chunk, and would love to see how many of those are just working really well for people. Maybe they're not being changed, but they work and they're being used and people love them and they use them in this way. And we'd love to get that documented and understand that as well. And I think that's going to be a cool focus.
Yeah, and as an added side note to that massive list of modules, the other day I hadn't looked at the PDF in a while, and I downloaded the PDF. The documentation is over 5,000 pages.
Yeah, it's gigantic.
So there's a lot going on. So yeah.
Yeah, we laugh at that because we also know how difficult it is to navigate through documentation, and you know why, because it's gigantic. That's one reason, right?
Don't tell my wife that you need that printed out, because she'll just print it out and leave it on top of my printer and just like act like it's somebody else's problem.
That's so funny. My husband as well.
It's like for some reason you feel the need to print all the things, but
all
you don't actually use it. Why?
Nope. Yep. Oh, that's funny. I try to print nothing. I don't print things. I own 3 printers. I don't print things.
We actually even generated EPUB, and I'd never opened that before. And because I was like, have we ever looked at this in a while? And I opened it yesterday, and it actually is formatted pretty nice. But I don't know if we had a download history. I have a feeling I'm like the only one in a while who's probably wanted to look at EPUB.
Maybe. That's funny. Yeah, something that I think is really interesting about documentation is because we take that approach at times of over communication is probably better. But in the case where we are right now with the documentation on SALT, I think that we need some cleanup, and we probably need more of that. Like what we've been going through with the docs group is also some like rework, or like links that don't work, or this is obsolete, or these examples are no longer relevant. And so there's definitely cleanup to do there. So we've over communicated in a way, but we also haven't cleaned up our mess and gone back and made them relevant. And we're working on that, so we'll get there. Our 5,000 pages hopefully will become less. I say that like it's tech debt, like tech debt doesn't exist. Like at some point you actually pay it off like a car. That doesn't actually happen. I know that. There's no credit involved here. We're all at the debt of ourselves, right? Yeah.
There's all one thing and something else comes up. That's how it works.
That's how it works.
All right. Well, if nobody has anything else to add, we're going to wrap this up. And I'm sure I'll see some of you in the docs working group. Enjoy the rest of your week. As always, reach out if you have topic suggestions. We don't have any specific or focused topics for next week as of yet. So definitely if somebody has something on their mind, a problem they want to discuss, whatever, please bring that up and we will add it to the open hour agenda. And as always, reach out to me if I can help you with anything. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Good one, everybody.
Bye.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.